Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Omar Khalid. But today is Monday, the 24th of January 2022. These are the stories that we'll be discussing during the course of the show. We will begin, ladies and gentlemen, with the lack of press freedom. In fact, the complete lack of press freedom as far as India is concerned, especially in an illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Journalists have been condemned, they have been threatened, they have been put in jail, their voices have been silenced over the years. But this whole routine has only taken more of an aggressive attitude in the last few years, especially since 2019. What can be done of it? Despite the different reports that come out every now and then in all the big media houses, the latest being all the important media outlets such as the Washington Post or Al Jazeera that talk about the curbing of press freedom, nothing is being done by India. What needs to be done? What kind of pressure does India need to be put in order to give the journalists their freedom? This is going to be our first story. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the rise of Islamophobia in the West. This is something that our Prime Minister Imran Khan Sahab has been talking about since his first address to the United Nations General Assembly. This is also something that our government firmly believes in highlighting. This is also something that has been gaining momentum in the West. Why is this happening? What needs to be done? And why are people so afraid as far as the Muslims or the Islam as a religion is concerned? This is going to be our second story. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk about Justice Aisha Malik, who has today taken her oath as the Supreme Court judge and has finally become the country's first female judge to reach the apex court. A lot of congratulatory messages have come from across the board, including from Prime Minister Imran Khan. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we'll talk about the polio campaign that has begun all over the country in the different provinces starting from today. This had been announced the day before yesterday by Dr. Faisal Sultan, and now this has begun all across the country. Also, we'll be talking about religious leader Mufti Qazi Yahya Khan, who has been trying to make a difference against all odds in Quetta as far as this polio campaign is concerned, to make people understand how important this polio campaign is. Let's begin with our first story, ladies and gentlemen, and that concerns press freedom, India, and how it is trying to curb this press freedom, especially since 2019. More in the following report.
Press freedom in Kashmir has long been stifled with various threats. Dozens of journalists have been arrested, interrogated, and investigated under harsh anti-terror laws. The largest journalist body, the Kashmir Press Club Srinagar, is taken over by a set of journalists who were accompanied by the Indian Army. The future of press freedom in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir has been thrown into question after the premises were shut down by the occupant administration. The former Chief Minister Umar Abdullah also called the seizure a state-sponsored coup. Chairman Jammu and Kashmir Salvation Movement Altaf Ahmed condemned the coup of the Indian occupation forces on Kashmir Press Club and claimed the incident was yet another attempt to throttle press freedom. There has been a growing crackdown on independent journalism in Kashmir since the Hindu nationalist government led by Narendra Modi unilaterally revoked the region's autonomy, stripped it of statehood, dissolved its government and brought it under Delhi's control. Recent arrest of Kashmiri journalist Sajjad Gul by the Indian soldiers is another painful reminder that India is deliberately targeting Kashmiri journalists. Stephen Butler, Asia Program Coordinator of the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists on Gul arrest, comments that Indian authorities appear determined to prevent journalists from doing their jobs. An editor at Kashmir Times, Anuradha Bhasin, confesses that Indian scrutiny by stating that the authorities have created a systematic fear and launched a direct assault on free media, resulting in a complete intolerance of even a single critical word. Indian ranking as 142nd in the Global Press Freedom Index by media watchdog Reporters Without Borders, below Afghanistan and Zimbabwe, systematically raises concerns about shrinking press freedom.
To talk about this shrinking press freedom and where all of it is going, we've been joined by Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Sahiba. She is, of course, a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Sahiba, thank you very much to have joined us.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Sahiba, when it comes to press freedom and India, these, since the last couple of years at least, seems to be on two opposite poles, don't they?
Exactly. If we see the model of governance of BJP under Modi, it completely relies on misleading information, creating a propaganda and creating information bubble as well. First, they create information bubble by restricting the press from telecasting or writing about the truth and ground realities, and then they fill that bubble with the false information to create certain images. So if we see, they believe in they believe more in creating false images than actually addressing the issue.
All right.
So this is very evident in their
But Dr.
mindset
Sabha,
and
what
policy
needs
making.
to be done? What all the damage that has been done as far as press freedom is concerned in India, doesn't the West realize that? We see all the reports, whether it be Freedom, Reporters Without Borders, that ranks it as 142nd on its list. I mean, it is the third. It's on number 3 from the lowest down. Nevertheless, nothing is being done. The Amnesty International writes about it, the United Nations writes about it, different parliamentarians talk about it, whether it be in the European Union or in the United Kingdom. But I mean, nothing comes out of it.
Recognizing the problem is the first step. And all those reports, and I would like to include the Committee on Protection of Journalists also writes about it. And but this is the first step that international community or so-called international organizations which talk about human rights and press freedom and democratic values, they have started mentioning and reporting that how Modi regime in India is damaging the human rights and press freedom. And you may not be surprised to know that in the press freedom index, India falls after Afghanistan and Zimbabwe. It is on number 142. So everyone knows that Afghanistan is a war-torn country. They are not a democracy. They don't claim to be a democracy as well. But if India is performing much worse than them, then this is a question mark on the collective conscience of India.
But is there a collective conscience in India?
There would be, but they are not realizing the negatives in their collective mindset. They are not realizing that how these policies of subjugation and oppression are damaging them. I was reading an article by senior Kashmiri journalist, Ms. Bhasin, and she wrote that Modi regime doesn't like journalism, but they only want journalists who are stenotypists for the government. They don't appreciate independent reporting. Have you seen anywhere in the democratic world that government can put journalists behind the bar under a law of Public Safety Act for 2 years without any trial or without giving them any chance to defend themselves? And this is how Modi regime is inculcating fears among Kashmiris and Kashmiri voices that they should stop even talking or dreaming about freedom.
Has the whole methodology of journalism changed in India because of this fear?
Yes, specifically in Kashmir. Because Kashmir is the least reported conflict of the world. Kashmir is a sieged area. Kashmir was suffering from this information blackout for last at least 2-3 years. Kashmir is not an area where Indian or foreign journalists can go and visit around without the permission of government. And then in Kashmir, government has, by using oppression tactics, has curbed the citizen journalism as well. And so Kashmir is the thing which is, or is the scar which India wants to hide from the world and from its own people as well, living in larger India. So definitely in Kashmir, recently they even tried to occupy the press club of Srinagar.
Yes.
And
then blame the journalists
for that.
Exactly.
That they didn't commit elections. And similarly in the Jammu press club, which is Hindu majority press club, they never conducted any elections and they are free to operate. But in Srinagar, and why press club they occupied or seized it or sealed it? Only because usually press clubs are a progressive hub of the conscience of a society. Press club is for those people who can speak truth right in the eyes of the oppression. And they are inculcating, and this is a systematic effort to inculcate fear among Kashmiris.
Of course, I mean,
it is
and
not an
I would
abrupt
call what
action.
inclusion in all of this procedure is also the curbing of the internet facilities.
Exactly.
Because you cannot even talk on social
India
media about
had
all of these barbarities.
largest number of internet shutdowns in the civilized world last year. So this shows that how Modi regime also realizes that they arrested Kashmiri journalists that they are inculcating hatred against Indian government. So what exactly Modi regime's policies are doing in Kashmir? Aren't they inculcating hatred against India? And what else, like SK Dullat, Jaswant Singh, other conscious and other sane voices in India, aren't they wrote about it?
Everybody has written about
That
it, even Rana Ayub, for example.
Yeah, Rana Ayub, the Modi is inculcating hatred against India. They wrote even to the extent that India has lost Kashmir. But only if a Kashmiri journalist writes about it. If you remember, last year, 4 Kashmiri journalists won this prize for International Award for photojournalism. And Indian government was like also portraying them as a national shame because highlighting the conflict in Kashmir. And thanks to Modi policies that I was reading international newspapers, whether it was Washington Post or Arab News or Diplomat, they wrote Indian controlled Kashmir, disputed region of Himalaya. So this is how international community has realized that Kashmir is not part of India.
All right.
They said it was written that Modi regime says that Kashmir should be resolved between Pakistan and India. But they said they wrote that Kashmir is on UN agenda since 1948. How it can be?
And India realized that it was India itself that went to the United Nations in 1948.
And how India can domesticate this issue when this issue has international repercussions.
Talking about issues with national repercussions, international repercussions, also the freedom of press, journalistic capabilities, and the way to move ahead. I will quote, you talked about the Committee to Protect Journalists. Now, Stephen Butler, who's the Asia Program Coordinator for this organization, has said that Indian authorities appear determined to prevent the journalists from doing their jobs.
Exactly.
Now, if this whole procedure continues, and it has been continuing since a couple of years, we have Sajjad Gul as one of the latest examples, who's been incarcerated because of talking freely about what is actually happening in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Where does all of this go? And what could be done internally or externally?
Here I would like to add the Kashmiri doctor who talked about the Indian incapacity to deal with COVID-19 in Kashmir and lack of the facilities. He just in Pakistan also doctors and social media activists talk about how we should deal with COVID and where we are lacking our strong points. But in Indian occupied Kashmir, a Kashmiri doctor out of his profession talked about what they need to help innocent Kashmiris to fight against COVID-19. He was put behind the bars for months. So this is the real face of Modi regime, and this is how India is dealing with Kashmiris. What can be done? Despite all the information blackouts, internet shutdowns, I think we should keep writing the truth because this is an era of advanced technology. Whatever
you cannot
Modi
hide,
does,
you cannot
yes,
hide, Dr. Saiba, the truth any longer as you could do a couple of decades back.
Yes, and if fear would be a tactic to suppress and occupy a territory, colonization would never end in the world. Colonial powers also inculcated fears. Dictators also inculcate fears, but no one lasted. The will of people supersede all atrocities and subjugation at the end of the day. So this is what Modi regime should realize. And if they don't realize it, we should make sure that we are highlighting Kashmiris themselves, because Kashmiri diaspora, Kashmiri living in Indian occupied Kashmir, Kashmiri living in Azad Jammu and Kashmir, they should keep highlighting the plight of innocent Kashmiri people. The way even we should also contest when international press use the term terrorist for any Kashmiri freedom fighter, because they are not terrorists.
They are fighting for their rights, for their due rights of self-determination.
International community promised 74 years back, promised them the right of self-determination.
To decide what they want to do.
Yes, they, under any definition of terrorism or terrorist, they are not terrorists. And this is the high time that we should start protesting using of this term, because when we see Modi regimes, another trend in media policy, they coin the terms to dilute the intensity of the problem. So we should also keep observing and highlighting
but
those.
But we are observing, highlighting. I remember this, of course, the Foreign Office briefing that was held on the 16th of this month, in which it was said that Pakistan calls on the world to hold India accountable for the harassment and the arrests of journalists in occupied Kashmir. But will the world hold India accountable? I mean, we've talked so many times, Dr. Saba, about the geostrategic, geoeconomic importance of India and how it's very dear to certain countries in the West because of this, and they let go of certain irregularities that happen in India. They are no longer certain irregularities. India is full of irregularities and curbing of rights, curbing of press freedom and whatnot. Till when will the West continue to turn a blind eye?
I think if West is turning the blind eye, we cannot stop our struggle. Their blind eye doesn't define our understanding of the Kashmir freedom movement. We have to play our role, and international community, if they can't, like again when Indian colonial power in Kashmir, they will meet the same fate what all other colonial powers met. So, and you know, when the world was colonized, all colonial powers were in power. They were the decision makers, they were the trendsetters. Even then they were unable to maintain or sustain the colonization.
Dr. Saba, one last question. I mean, we've talked about, and we will continue to talk about, the way India is targeting the minorities and the journalists and especially the Muslims and people in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, the true citizens and nationals of that region, so as to, as per their designs and their Hindutva policy and their RSS ideology. Now, we've also read a lot about the clash of civilizations. Do you feel this is part and parcel of all of that, what is happening in India and in illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir?
Yes, definitely. If we don't have much time to discuss it, but if we see the Indian strategic culture, subjugating Kashmiri Muslims is a symbol of their Hindutva policy, and it somehow satisfy their sense of superiority over the rest. And that is why they used occupation of Indian occupied Kashmir and subjugation of Kashmiris as a medal, as a trophy for the radical Hindu vote bank. And that is how this whole process is working on. And then on every democratic index, whether it is gender equality or it is press freedom or it is human rights, minority rights, inclusive society, everywhere India is performing worst under Modi regime. But the problem is, which I always say, is that all this worst performance doesn't have any political dividend for Modi. If it would have any political dividend on domestic front or international front for Modi, the chances are higher that they may rethink about where they are heading.
But I don't think they want to rethink anything about the way they are moving forward.
Because all atrocities has positive political dividend at domestic front.
I agree.
Modi is getting Hindutva vote bank. People, and they are it is a delusion. Hindutva is a delusional bubble because India was never.
But it's going to burst one day or another, Dr. Saba.
Because India was never a Hindu state in the whole history. 5,000 years before Christ, if we see, India was never a Hindu state. And I was reading somewhere that these Hindutva goons should be thankful to Muslims, because Muslims were the first community which made this India as a one country. They established India as one country. Prior to that, India was never been a single.
Well, Dr. Asma Shakir, I really hope, I mean, I can only hope and I can pray and I can wish the Indian government and the Indian regime realizes what it is doing. Because if it continues the way it is, the country is going to implode in, as you said, in different fragments, in different segments or regions, and this would be creating havoc for this country that called itself the biggest democracy in the entire world.
But we cannot knock any sense in their mindset.
Well, let's see what happens.
This is the problem with the
I
radicalism.
agree with you on that. Let's see what happens in the future. I'd like to end this with a quote by of course, journalist from Kashmir, who said, "Sometimes I wonder if it is worth to be a journalist in the region." Let's hope this realization comes before it's too late and before things really are very difficult to handle for the Indian government. All we can say is, as Dr. Saiba said, wishful thinking. Nevertheless, wishful is the key word. Let's go to our second segment, but before that, thank you very much, Dr. Asma Shakir Khaja Saiba, to have joined us. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns Islamophobia in the West. This is something that we have talked about in the past as well. This is something that the current government has been highlighting on different fora as well, whether it be the United Nations General Assembly or other international fora. It is something that is extremely important for the Muslims of the world. This fear of Islam, this fear of Muslims that we call Islamophobia. More in the following report.
Islamophobia in the world has reached a tipping point and became a menacing ingredient of political landscape. The rampant prevalence of faith-based hatred directed at Muslims is taking invisible toll upon the community. Underlining the gravity of the situation, former British Junior Transport Minister Nusrat Ghani revealed that she had been fired because of her Muslimness, as she was earlier told her Muslimness was making colleagues uncomfortable. Mark Spencer, the government's chief whip, however, denied the allegations and rendered them defamatory. Caroline Nooks, who heads British Parliament's Women and Equalities Committee, stated that Ghani's treatment has been appalling and she was brave to speak out. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson compared women who wear face-covering veil to letterboxes back in 2018. A report by Professor Savaran Singh, who has served as a commissioner for the UK's Equality and Human Rights Commission, found that most discrimination within the UK's ruling Conservative Party relates to anti-Muslim racism. Distressing examples of anti-Muslim sentiments are unbridled in the US politics as well, where a handful of Muslims in the US Congress are routinely subjected to threatening calls and personal attacks from conservative pundits and some legislators. Escalating attacks on mosque and Islamophobic graffiti indicate anti-Muslim, racist and xenophobic ideas have been on the rise in the West, and Muslims have been exposed to direct attacks. The international community, especially the UN, as well as non-governmental organizations and human rights organizations, have to hold governments accountable for targeting and marginalizing Muslims.
Now, to discuss this issue in detail, we've been joined by Dr. Anis Ahmed Saab. He's a religious scholar. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Saab, when it comes to Islamophobia, this fear of Islam, this fear of Muslims, where does all of this emanate from? Why is the West so afraid of this religion that is a religion of peace?
Well, I think we have to go back to our history to understand the background. I would like to say that the existing wave of Islamophobia is not confined to Muslims, but it is essentially a continuation of the colonialist approach which kept several parts of the world colonized for centuries. You know better than me, in South Africa, as well as in many Muslim parts of the world, like in Algiers particularly, there was French colonization. And in Algiers particularly, they went forward and had some festivals in which they would like Muslim women to take off their hair scarf and throw in fire. This was done by the military in Algiers. And this is not just me, this is Frantz Fanon writes about it, who was himself an Algerian. It's not a matter of just recent phenomena, but it's a very old phenomena. It's the mind of colonialists that act in that way. The recent wave began with post 9/11 scenario, and there we find that three aspects triggered the whole issue. First and foremost, the Orientalist view of Islam and Muslims was that women are not discriminated but suppressed. And that's how Orientalists presented women for over 100 years. Secondly, the white racist supremacy, which was the main cause of colonialism, that gave them a feeling that the white racist culture and civilization is superior and all else are inferior. And their presence in many parts of the world. Today, you find that whether it's Europe or America or any part of the world, Muslims have a presence all over the globe. And Muslims in Europe, particularly, in some cases have posed a demographic change. Therefore, the white racist mind and culture felt that if this factor is present, then they have a fear and threat to their own culture. Thirdly, they believe that they are the liberators. They are the civilizing force. And therefore, to civilize Muslims, they think if women are educated to come without a scarf, then they will be more civilized and more acceptable to their own norms. And lastly, a phobia has been created
All
that
right. When you talk of this phobia, Dr. Anis, when you talk of this phobia, I mean, when you see the different other religions as well, even their religious scholars, even in their churches or in their religious places of worship, the people do wear scarves or other forms of scarves, or they cover their heads. Why not allow the Muslims across the world to, I mean, do whatever they want to? Isn't that part of any democratic principle as well, if we talk about the West in general?
Well, you see, the main reason is if a person following Buddhism, Hinduism, or any other faith is asked to uncover her head, it does not harm her faith. But if a Muslim girl is asked to uncover her head, then it is part of the boy to be covered religiously. Therefore, she feels hurt and she resists. This resistance is the fear.
But
Whether
Dr.
you know,
Saab, even in the Sikhs, they wear turbans and they do not take their turbans off, despite whatever pressure they might be put into. So, I mean, there are other religions as well, Dr. Saab, where people do put, I mean, adorn their heads and do not want to take those off. When we talk of freedom of expression, doesn't that negate that very freedom?
well, this is the dual standard of the West, which becomes very visible. They believe in some kind of dichotomization of society where they dichotomize people by way of their religious feelings and culture. And this is essentially against their claim of an open society. An open society means people have liberty to follow their cultural norms. But what's happening is a specific white culture, supremacist culture, is imposed on people. Why in Switzerland the minaret became a problem?
All right.
Why?
Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us and to have given us an outlook about what Islamophobia stands for and why there is a certain wave of Islamophobia in the West. With that, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow. Take care. Allah Hafiz.